All right, strap in, everybody, because today we are diving deep, and I mean deep, into some seriously mind-bending stuff.
Oh, yeah, I thought.
We're going to be exploring a lecture by Neville Goddard called, and this is a great title, One Greater Than John.
I love this one.
I'm already intrigued, and we're only like 2 sentences in.
Absolutely.
So before we jump into the really good stuff, for anyone who might not be familiar with Neville Goddard, can you give us like a quick 2-sentence overview of who he was and what his teachings were all about?
Sure. So Neville Goddard was a mid-20th century spiritual teacher and author, really, and he's best known for his teachings on the law of assumption. And this is the idea that our thoughts create our reality.
Okay, so that's the super condensed version.
Yeah.
But there's so much more to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many layers.
Which is why we're doing a deep dive.
Yeah, we're going to peel back some of those layers today.
Okay, so in this particular lecture, One Greater Than John, Neville really focuses on these 2 figures, right?
Yes.
John the Baptist and, of course, Jesus Christ.
Right.
But he uses them in a way that's, it's not your typical Sunday school lesson.
Definitely not.
So can you explain a little bit about, how Neville interprets these figures? What do they represent in his teachings?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most intriguing things about Neville is he doesn't take biblical figures literally. So he uses these figures to represent states of consciousness that we all experience.
Got it.
So we're not talking about literal people here. We're talking about aspects of ourselves.
So archetypes almost?
Yeah, exactly.
Like these universal energies that live within us.
Exactly.
Okay. And specifically in this lecture, he talks about John the Baptist as being the last stage before you reach what he calls the Jesus Christ consciousness.
Right. And this is where things get really interesting because he uses a lot of his own personal experiences to illustrate this transition. And it's really powerful because he grew up in Barbados.
Oh.
In a culture where there was a lot of indulgence, I guess, in food and drink and celebrations.
So a very vibrant kind of maybe even hedonistic kind of atmosphere.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And Neville really enjoyed all of that.
And indulged in all of it.
He indulged in all of it. And then at the age of 21, he had this really dramatic shift. He suddenly became a strict vegetarian, teetotaler, and celibate all at the same time for 7 years.
Wow. So it was a complete 180.
Yeah, a complete turnaround.
That's a pretty drastic change.
It is. It's huge.
And what prompted that? What was the catalyst for that?
It's not entirely clear what caused it, but it seemed to be an internal shift, something just clicked inside of him. And during this time, he had an encounter with a mysterious figure named Abdullah.
Okay.
Who told him something really cryptic. He said, "You're going to die, but you will not surely die."
Okay, that is definitely cryptic.
And this really stuck with Neville, and he didn't understand what it meant at the time. But he later came to interpret this as a foreshadowing of his transition from the John the Baptist state to the Jesus Christ state.
Okay, I'm already, my mind's spinning with questions.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot to take in.
So, how did he go from, this strict, self-denial to then reaching the Jesus Christ consciousness?
Well, there's this really interesting story where he was living in New York City at the time, and he decided he wanted to go back to Barbados. And he didn't have the money for a ticket.
Yeah.
So he decided to use his imagination. And every night before he went to sleep, he would imagine himself back in Barbados, walking along the beach, feeling the sand between his toes, smelling the ocean air, really immersing himself in that feeling of being there.
Okay, so he's clothing himself with the feeling of being in Barbados, even though physically he was still in New York.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
Yeah, it's a powerful technique. And a few weeks later, he received a letter from his brother in Barbados containing a ticket for him to come home.
No way.
Yeah, so it's his imagination, his assumption of being in Barbados actually manifested in his reality.
So he goes back to Barbados, and that's where the dying but not really dying part comes in.
Yeah, because when he got back to Barbados, he completely let go of all of that strict self-discipline he had been practicing for 7 years.
So he was indulging in all the things he had been denying himself.
Exactly.
The food, the drink, the The whole 9 yards.
All 9 yards, yeah. And this is what he saw as his symbolic death, the death of the John the Baptist state, that state of striving and denial.
So it wasn't a literal death,
No, it was the death of an old identity.
but death of a state of consciousness.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's how we made the transition from John to Jesus. But what does that actually mean? Like, what does it mean to embody that that Jesus Christ consciousness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something we're going to explore more deeply in the next part of our deep dive.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I am still processing everything we talked about in that last segment, especially that whole symbolic death thing.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild concept when you first hear it.
It is. It is.
Mm.
So we left off talking about how Neville made this transition from, the John the Baptist state to the Jesus Christ state. But I think we need to unpack that a little bit more. Like, what does it actually mean to embody that Jesus Christ consciousness?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's important to remember that Neville is using these terms symbolically.
Right, right.
So we're not talking about like literally becoming Jesus,
Of course, of course.
but rather embodying certain qualities or states of being that he associates with Jesus.
Okay, so what are those qualities? Like, what does that look like in practice?
Well, for Neville, Jesus Christ represents it represents a state of complete freedom and fulfillment,
Okay.
where we truly understand and can apply spiritual law to create the life we desire.
Got it. So it's like reaching like the highest level of spiritual awareness almost.
Exactly, yeah. It's about moving beyond limitation and stepping into our full power as creators.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
So like, how do we get there? How do we make that shift from, feeling limited to feeling that sense of freedom and fulfillment?
Well, Neville talks a lot about the power of clothing oneself with the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We touched on that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it's a key concept in his teachings, and it's really about embodying the feeling of already having what you desire, even if it hasn't manifested in the physical world yet.
Okay. So like, if I want to manifest a new job, for example,
Yeah.
I would need to feel the excitement and satisfaction of already having that job.
Exactly, yeah. You would imagine yourself going to work every day at this new job, feeling the joy of doing work that you love,
Okay.
receiving a paycheck that reflects your true worth, interacting with supportive colleagues, all of that.
So it's not just about like thinking positive thoughts. It's about actually feeling it in your body.
Yes, exactly. It's about embodying the feeling, not just intellectually understanding the concept.
Got it. Got it. And Neville says, I remember this quote, if they really believe it, they don't make it so, it is so.
Yes, that's a powerful one.
And it really emphasizes that inner knowing, that feeling of certainty.
Exactly, yeah. It's about knowing that what you desire is already yours on a deep intuitive level.
Okay. So I'm with you so far. But what about all the practical steps involved in, manifesting something like a new job? Like, do
Yeah.
we still need to, update our resume and go on interviews and all of that? Or does that just kind of become irrelevant in this framework?
Yeah, that's a common question, and it's a good one. It's not that the practical steps become irrelevant, but they flow more effortlessly when you're in that state of Jesus Christ consciousness.
Okay.
When you're aligned with your desire on a feeling level, you naturally start taking inspired action.
So it's like the actions come from a different place.
Exactly, yeah. They're not driven by fear or desperation, but by a sense of alignment and purpose.
Got it. Got it. So it's like, it's not about, sitting back and passively waiting for things to happen, but it's about taking action from a place of like inner alignment, I guess you could say.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is where the concept of moments comes in.
Moments.
Yeah, Neville talks about these seemingly empty spaces between the assumption, the feeling of your desire, and its fulfillment in the physical world.
Okay. We talked about moments a little bit in the first part,
Yes.
but I'll admit I'm still a little fuzzy on that concept. Can you break it down a little bit more?
Sure. So imagine you plant a seed in the ground, right?
Right.
You water it, you nurture it, but there's a period of time where it seems like nothing is happening.
Right.
But beneath the surface, the seed is germinating, it's gathering the energy it needs to sprout and grow. And those moments are like that. They're not empty, they're filled with potential. It's just that the growth is happening beneath the surface.
Ah, okay. So it's like in the context of manifestation, those moments are actually a time of incubation.
Exactly, yeah. It's where things are working behind the scenes, even if we can't see it yet.
Got it. Got it. So patience is key here.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about trusting the process, knowing that your desire is taking form, even if it hasn't fully materialized in the physical world yet.
And that ties back to the difference between John the Baptist and Jesus Christ, right?
Yes, exactly.
Like John is all about striving and trying to force things to happen, while Jesus is about surrender and trust in the divine process.
Exactly. And when you're in that state of surrender, you're not attached to the outcome. You know that what you desire is already yours, and you're simply allowing it to unfold in its own time.
So how do we know if we're truly embodying that Jesus Christ consciousness?
Yeah.
Like, are there any signs or indicators?
Well, Neville talks about the Holy Spirit in this context. He says, "You'll receive power after the Holy Spirit has come upon you." And now that might sound a bit mystical or religious, but what he's really talking about is a shift in energy,
Okay.
a feeling of empowerment and certainty.
So it's like a knowing almost, like a deep inner knowing that everything is working out exactly as it should.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about moving from a place of doubt and uncertainty to a place of deep inner conviction.
Okay, I love that. So it sounds like this transition from John to Jesus is a process.
Right. Absolutely.
It's not like a sudden overnight shift.
It's a journey, not a destination.
We might experience glimpses of that Jesus Christ consciousness.
Yeah.
But then fall back into old patterns of, striving and self-doubt.
Exactly. And that's okay. It's all part of the process.
So it's about being patient with ourselves.
Yes.
And like trusting that we're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely, yeah. And Neville encourages us to keep practicing, to keep trusting in the process. He reminds us that God has prepared a way for himself to return individualized as you.
So it's not about becoming some like distant superhuman figure.
Right.
But it's about realizing the divine potential within each of us.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the beauty of Neville's teachings. It's all about empowering us to create the life we desire, to become the best versions of ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. So on that note, should we take a quick break and then come back for the final part of our deep dive?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so we're back, and I feel like my brain has officially been stretched to its limits.
I know, right? This is some seriously deep stuff we're exploring.
It is, but it's also incredibly exciting. Like this idea that we have the power to create our own reality is, it's empowering to say the least.
It really is. And one of the things that really stood out to me in this lecture is that concept of moments. Those periods where it seems like nothing's happening, but really it's all brewing beneath the surface.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier, like the seed analogy, right?
Exactly. And I think it's so important to remember that, especially when we're in the process of manifesting our desires, because it's easy to get discouraged, when we don't see immediate results.
Oh, absolutely. Like we can start to doubt ourselves, doubt the process, and maybe even slip back into those old patterns of like striving and forcing things to happen.
Exactly. But that's where faith comes in, right? It's about trusting that even though we can't see it yet, things are working out behind the scenes.
Okay, so like how do we cultivate that faith? Like especially when we're feeling impatient or doubtful.
Well, I think it starts with remembering that feeling of certainty we talked about earlier, that Jesus Christ consciousness, where we know deep down that what we desire is already ours.
So it's like, even if our current reality doesn't reflect what we want, we have to hold on to that feeling of knowing.
Exactly. And the more we practice that, the more we embody that feeling, the more our outer reality will start to align with our inner world. It's like we're creating a magnetic pull, drawing our desires into our experience.
Okay, that makes sense. So basically it all comes back to that feeling, that state of being.
Absolutely. And remember what Neville says, feeling is the secret.
Feeling is the secret. I like that. So for our listeners who are like ready to dive in and start experimenting with all of this, what's like one practical tip they can take away from this deep dive?
I would say start small. Choose one desire that feels manageable, something that excites you but doesn't feel overwhelming.
Okay, keep it simple.
Yeah, and then really focus on embodying the feeling of already having it. Spend a few minutes each day visualizing yourself in that reality, feeling the emotions, the sensations, all of it.
And don't get discouraged if things don't happen overnight.
Right. Exactly. It's a process, not a magic trick. But the more you practice, the more you'll start to see those shifts in your outer world.
This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I'm so grateful for your insights. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of Neville's teachings and, honestly, a whole new perspective on the power of my own mind.
Me too. It's always inspiring to dive deep into Neville's work. There's always something new to discover.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Neville Goddard's One Greater Than John. We hope you found it as mind-expanding as we have. And until next time, remember, feeling is the secret.